Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist and today doing a Kashtira deck profile. So I'm really excited to do this for you guys because this deck is the best deck this format, and currently one of my favorite decks to play. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards. Like getting your name description in a single video, getting assigned cards in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month to your Patreon. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 2 copies of Kashtira Unicorn. This is one of the best cards in the entire deck, and a 1-card combo to make an absolutely crazy board. This card has a really cool ability. If you do not control a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then during your main phase, you can add a Kashtira spell from your deck to your hand, which is amazing to be able to search either Kashtira Theosis or your copy of Kashtira Birth, which is amazing for this card to be able to do. This card also has the ability that when this card declares an attack, or if your opponent's monster activates an effect, then you can actually look at your opponent's extract, and if you do, banish 1 card from it face down, which is crazy that you can basically just look at your opponent's extract, get all of that knowledge that they're playing, and then get rid of one of their boss monsters, which is just amazing about this card. We then play 3 copies of Kashtira Fenrir. Fenrir is definitely a 3-of in the deck and one of the most powerful cards in the build, and it has the same effects as your copy of Unicorn, that if you don't control a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And during your main phase, you can add a Kashtira monster from your deck to your hand. And when this card declares an attack, or if your opponent activates a monster effect, you can actually target a face-up card your opponent controls and banish it face down, which is a really good effect for this card to have. We then play 3 copies of Kashtira Riseheart. Riseheart is a really good 3-of in the deck. You can play just 2 copies if you want to, but I've been playtesting with 3 and really like 3. This card has the ability, if you control a Kashtira monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. Also, it locks you into XZ monsters for the rest of the turn. And during your main phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, then you can banish a Kashtira card from your deck, except a copy of this card, and then banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck face down. And if you do, this card's level becomes 7, which makes it super easy to make rank 7 plays in the deck. And the card you're always going to want to use with this card's ability to banish a Kashtira card from the deck is your copy of Big Bang, which is just really good to be able to use when you have a copy of Shangri Era on your side of the field, so you can get one of the materials back onto your side of the field. This card is a definite 3-of in the build, and just really good in this particular deck. We then play a single copy of the Scareclaw Kashtira. This card is basically a super heavy samurai. It can attack while it's in defense position, and then apply its defense points as if it was its attack points, which is really good. It's very easy to put on your side of the field, because during your main phase, quick effects, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, banish a Kashtira or a Scareclaw card from your hand or your graveyard, which is a really cool thing to be able to do, especially if you have, say, a copy of Theosis that you can banish and you want to recover back one of your Kashtira cards that's banished. You can basically just banish Theosis from the graveyard and then recover one of your Kashtira cards that's banished, which is just really good about this card. This card has so many cool plays in the deck and just gives you a great extender in the build. We then play 3 copies of Dimensional Shifter. Shifter is really good this format and really good in this particular deck. And if you have no cards in your graveyard, quick effect, you send this card from your hand to the grave. Until the end of the next turn, any card sent to the grave is banished instead. This card can single-handedly end games depending on your matchup, and is a really awesome 3-of in this build just to deal with your opponent's plays. We then play 3 copies of Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom is one of the best hand traps in the entire game, and this card is a definite 3-of in the build just to stop your opponent from touching the deck. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to start out with a single copy of Terraforming. Terraforming is an amazing 1-of in the deck, so we can get to our really powerful field spell, which is then going to search out our copies of our Kashtira monsters, so this card is really good in the deck, and literally the searcher for the searcher. We then play a single copy of Harpy's Feather Duster. This is a going second build, so I made a lot of board breakers in this deck, so this card is really good in this particular build at just dealing with your opponent's back row. We then play a single copy copy of Dark Hole. Dark Hole is really good in the deck just at destroying the field and then summoning out our Kashtira monster so that we can go in for game. We then play 2 copies of Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm is really good at dealing with back row or dealing with monsters on the field, which is really good. You could play 2 more copies of Dark Hole instead of the 2 copies of Lightning Storm to bump Dark Hole to 3, but I really like this card at dealing with my opponent's back row, which is why I play this card as a 2 of in the build. We then play 2 copies of Triple Tactics Talents. Triple Tactics Talents is really good in this particular deck as a 2 of, because it either lets you draw 2, take control of the opponent's monster, or look at your opponent's hand and choose 1 card in it and shuffle it back in the deck, which is really good to give you a knowledge of your opponent's hand so that you can know exactly what you're going to have to play through as you're playing this deck, which is really insane. We then play 2 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust. This card is amazing in this particular build because you can literally search any of these cards off your copy of Thrust, and it's really good going second to be able to drop a copy of Thrust, grab a copy of Dark Hole or your copy of Feather Duster off of it, and either destroy all the spells and traps if you're going up against a back row heavy deck, or destroy all the monsters if you're going up against a monster heavy deck, which is just really insane. I absolutely love this card, especially when my opponent has a monster on the field. I just get to add it to hand, which is just really good. These is a really crazy 2 of in the deck. We then play 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. This card is really good, especially in this particular deck with your copy of Arise Heart, being able to attach banish cards to it. You have a bunch of targets that you actually want to attach to Arise Heart, so you can banish some really cool cards off your Prosperity and then attach them to Arise Heart off of Arise Heart's ability, which is really good, such as your copy of Cyframe Lord Omega, your Infinitrack Goliath, your copies of your Skull Knight. There's just so many cool targets for this card to be able to banish, and it just gives you pluses, which is why this card is so good as a 3 of in the build. We then play 2 copies of Forbidden Lance. Forbidden Lance is really good in this deck to help you protect yourself from spells and traps, and this card can also drop monsters' attack points down by 800, which does come up every so often depending on the matchup. We then play 3 copies of the Pressured Planet. This card is basically the Rhoda for the deck, which is why you don't see a lot of monsters in the deck. That this card is probably the most crazy card in the entire deck, because it just does so much for the build, that when this card is activated, you add a Kashtira monster from your deck to your hand, and then monsters that you control gain 100 attack and defense for each different attribute on the field, and that does count for your opponent's side of the field as well, which is just really cool. And if a Kashtira Shangri-Ira you control activates an effect, except during the damage step, you can actually target a card on the field and destroy it, which is just such a good effect to be able to pop cards on the field when your copy of Shangri-Ira goes off. We then play 3 copies of Kashtira Theosis. This card is what you usually search off your copy of your Unicorn if you open up your copy of Unicorn, and this card plus a copy of Fenrir is full combo and the craziest field that you can actually make in the deck. And this card is really good because it lets you target a Kashtira monster that you control and then special summon a Kashtira monster with a different attribute from your deck and defense position. Also, for the rest of the turn, you're locked into XZ monsters, which is totally fine because that's usually all we're summoning anyways. But this card has a great ability. If this card is banished, you can actually target one of your banished Kashtira cards and add it back to your hand, except a copy of this card, which is what I was mentioning earlier about the copy of the Scareclaw Kashtira, because you can actually banish this card from the graveyard, and if you have a copy of a Kashtira card that you want back that's banished, you can just grab it back by banishing this card off the Scareclaw, which is really insane. I love that about this card, and it's just really powerful as a 3 of in the deck. We then play 3 copies of Kashtira Birth. This card helps you in the grind game so much because it lets you normal summon a level 7 monster without tributing during your main phase. You can also special summon during your main phase one non-XZ Kashtira monster that is banished or in your graveyard back to your side of the field once per turn. And if your opponent activates a spell card or effect and you control a Kashtira monster, you can target 3 cards in your opponent's graveyard and banish them face down, which is really good just to be able to deal with your opponent's graveyard and get those cards banished face down so that they can't use them, which is just really insane. I love this card as a 3 of, and it helps out so much when you can get to this card extremely quickly. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're just going to be playing a single trap, and that's going to be 1 copy of Big Bang. Big Bang is really good in this particular build, because if a Kashtira XZ monster is on the field and a player controls 2 or more monsters, they must banish monsters so they face down, so they only control 1 monster, essentially being like evenly matched, which is really insane. But the main effect you're going to use on this card is if this card is banished, you can target a Kashtira XZ monster that you control and add one of your Kashtira monsters attached to it back to your hand, and then you can special summon that monster from your hand if you want to, or you can just keep it in your hand for a follow-up play, which is really nice. But the main reason you play this card as a one-of in the deck is because you always want to make Shangri Era first, and then summon out your copy of your Rise Heart. Use Rise Heart's ability to banish this card from the deck, and then grab one of the materials off your copy of Shangri Era and put it back on your side of the field. And then you make a copy of a Rise Heart on top of this card, which is just really good and gives you an insane field. It's really good in this particular deck as a one-of, but you never want to see this card in your opening hand because you want to be able to banish it off your copy of Rise Heart so you can go in for more plays. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to start off with our main boss monster, Kashtira, a Rise Heart. This card is crazy powerful. It's one of the most powerful boss monsters, in my opinion, ever made, and it's ridiculously easy to put on your side of the field. And as ability once per turn, you can also XZ summon this card by using one Kashtira monster you control if the effect of Shangri Era was successfully activated this turn. And you transfer all the materials from the monster, if it was an XZ monster, to this card. So for example, if you use the effect of your copy of Shangri Era, you can overlay into this card using any one Kashtira monster, which is crazy powerful. And any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. And once per chain, each time a card is banished, you attach one card to this card as a material, which is a mandatory effect to attach a card to this card if a card does become banished. And once per turn, quick effects, you can detach 3 materials from this card and target one card on the field and banish it face down, which is really insane for this card to be able to do. Just deal with cards that are on the field and banish them face down, because you're going to detach 3 materials and then attach one back, because those cards will actually get banished, and it can even make cards like Big Bang and Theosis go off when you detach them as a material, which is just so good. This card is the entire deck and what you're trying to get to so quickly in this deck, and it's really an insane boss monster. We then play 2 copies of Kashtira Shangri Era. Shangri Era is a 2-of, I feel is perfect. I don't feel like you need 3. I feel like 1 is not enough. And I feel like this card is perfect as a 2-of in the build, because during each standby phase, you can special summon a Kashtira monster from your deck, which is really good to instantly get a Kashtira monster onto your side of the field off this card's ability. And that's during every player's standby phase you get to special summon, which is just so good. This card also has a really cool ability. Each time a card your opponent controls is banished face down, you actually get to choose a monster zone or a spell and trap card zone that your opponent has on their side of the field and lock it down where they cannot use it, as long as this card remains face up on the field. And this card is just really good as well, because if this card would be destroyed by battle or by card effect, you just detach a material from this card instead, making it super easy in this deck to be able to protect this card and lock down your opponent's zones. I will recommend to you guys, if you're going in blind and you don't know what you're playing against, lock down one of the pendulum scale zones. It's the safest bet when you're playing this deck, and it's really good to be able to lock down a pendulum zone, because if you're playing against a super heavy samurai, then it basically turns off the entire deck until they can deal with this card. And it's just really good to lock down a spell and trap card zone first if you don't know what you're playing against. We then play 2 copies of Big Eye. I feel like 2 Big Eye is perfect in the deck because it lets you take control of an opponent's monster and you get to keep it permanently, which is really good depending on the matchup. We then play a single copy of my favorite XZ in the game, 1 copy of DarkArmed, the Dragon of Annihilation. This is one of the most important cards in the entire extract because it has a great ability that you can detach a material from this card and then target a card your opponent controls and destroy it, then banish a card from your graveyard, but this card cannot attack for the rest of the turn, but that's totally fine because it's really good in this particular deck to be able to use to detach a material, and that's not once per turn, to be able to then banish a card from the graveyard, which is super good in this deck because you can banish cards like Big Bang, or you can banish cards like Theosis to be able to use in the deck, which is amazing. We then play a single copy of Flare Metal. This card is for time. This card is amazing in the deck to be able to burn your opponent for 500 every time they breathe, and it's also a great card to play in this deck. We then play a single copy of Dracosack. Dracosack's amazing to out cards like Skill Drain, because this card will resolve off field and distribute itself as a material, which is really good for its effect. So you can pop Floodgates, which is really amazing. If you need to pop a card, this is your card to pop stuff. We play 2 copies of Double A Zeus. Double A Zeus is amazing to be able to board wipe the field and deals with other Kashtira decks extremely easily because this deck doesn't establish negates very well. So this card is really good to be able to just board wipe fields, and it ends games on its own. 1 copy of Baron de Fleur. We can actually summon this card. It's really weird how you have to summon this card, because you have to summon out a Kashtira monster and then normal summon a copy of Ash Blossom to make this card, which is a little bit awkward, but it's really good to make Baron de Fleur to have as a walking negate in the deck and a pop, which is really nice. We then play a single copy of Cyframe Lord Omega. This is one of the prosperity targets that we play in the deck, and this is how we actually recover back our copy of Arise Heart, because it has the ability, if this card is in your graveyard, you can actually target one other card in the grave and shuffle both this card and that card back in the deck. So if your opponent kaijus over your copy of Arise Heart, when this card is attached as a material, you can actually just shuffle it back into the extra deck and put your copy of Omega back, which is really good so you can make it again, especially since Arise Heart is currently limited to 1. We then play a single copy of the Fossil Warrior. Fossil Warrior is great as a 1-of in the deck to be able to use because you can banish this card from the graveyard and then destroy one monster on the field. And it doesn't just activate, you have to actively banish this card, which is really good in this particular deck because you can just play Elder Entity Nest, but then you open yourself up to copies of Triple Tactical Talents or Thrust, which is why I play this card over the Elder Entity Nest. We then play a single copy of Donner. Donner is great because you can pop a card on your side of the field and a card on your opponent's side of the field, and it's a link monster we can summon in the deck. And then finally, a single copy of Goliath. Goliath is really good because you can attach this card to your copy of Arise Heart when you banish this card from Prosperity, and it does give it the added bonus that this card cannot be destroyed by card effects, which gives your Arise Heart a little bit of protection in this deck. I will show you guys very quickly what the Prosperity targets that I usually banish in the deck are. If I'm going first, I usually banish Goliath, the copy of the Fossil Warrior, or the copy of Omega. Again, this is if I'm going first. Dracosac, the Flare Metal, and the copy of Big Eye if this is the first game. If I'm going into the third game, I usually save the copy of Flare Metal, and you might banish something like a Baron if you don't have an Ash Blossom in hand. These are the main targets that I usually banish off Prosperity, and it's just the best option in this particular deck to interchange out the copy of Flare Metal and the copy of Baron de Fleur for the copy of Prosperity, just to show you guys the Prosperity targets that I usually do. If you're going second, I usually save this card though, and I'll banish, say, a copy of all of this, and I'll keep the copy of Big Eye. These are the main targets that I usually banish going into game 1 and 2, depending on the time, but these are the best targets to be able to banish, especially since these three are the best ones to attach to your copy of Arise Heart after you use the Arise Heart and put it on your side of the field to either recover it if they kaiju it, pop a monster on the field, or be able to protect it from being destroyed by card effects. Usually the copy of Goliath is the most important one to attach first, then the Omega, and then finally the copy of the Skull Knight. Usually in this order is what I attach them in. And these are just good options depending on the matchup. If you know your opponent's going to floodgate you with like a skill drain, keep the copy of Dracosac and banish the Big Eye. But that's just some advice as I've been playing this deck since it was released, and it's just super fun to be able to play. I absolutely love this deck, and it is the most powerful deck this format, and it's really fun to be able to play. If you guys have never played Kashtira, definitely give the deck a try. It's super fun to be able to play, and you guys will definitely see why this deck is the best deck this format. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.